So we're not on the YouTube just yet. It says it's waiting for Onsite Gallery, Nick. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today on our virtual panel titled Kinship Through Art with our wonderful panelists. Aylan, Kai, Meera, and Mallory will be joining us very shortly. My name is Susan Jama, and I'm the Programs and the Community Coordinator here at Onsite Gallery, located at 199 Richmond Street West, Toronto, Ontario. I'm also the moderator of today's panel. Before we start the panel discussion, I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Onsite Gallery and OCAD University acknowledges the ancestral territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and the Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we work, stand, and create in. We also acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past through, and those of us who came here involuntarily as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin. I also would like to acknowledge our supporters. Onsite Gallery is generously supported by the Delaney family. We also acknowledge the support of our current exhibition, Rosalie Fable, Belonging 1982, with supporters from the Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, an agency of Ontario government, Toronto Arts Council, Nexus, and the Terra Foundation. So today's panel, Kinship Through Art, explores the ways familiar archives and artistic and research practices creates a space for reimagining identity, belonging, and shared cultural histories. Today, with our wonderful panelists who are here with us online, Meera, Aylan, Kai, and Mallory, we'll dive into how familial histories, intergenerational memory, and kinship shape, inform, and inspire, and share the ways in which personal and public archives come together in their work, becoming sources of insight, connection, and transformation. Together, they reflect on how these layered, self-directed approaches to storytelling broadens our understanding of identity, belonging, and collective memory, offering new entry points into how we see each other and ourselves. Today's theme of the panel being kinship, it is strongly and deeply connected to our current exhibition, Rosalie Fable, Belonging 1982 to 2024, which is on view till Saturday, December 6th. So if you haven't had the opportunity to pop by here in Toronto, visiting us at Onsite Gallery, feel free to do so, as we're open Wednesdays to Saturdays, noon onwards. And for more information, feel free to check us out on our website or on our Instagram or Facebook pages. Rosalie Fable, a celebrated Red River Métis artist, draws from her family's photographic archive to speak to and bear witness to the lived experiences that have shaped her life. Through these intimate images that is seen throughout the exhibition, she reflects on growing up during a time when finding a sense of belonging was often complex and challenging. Her work offers a powerful mediation on identity, family, and the stories we inherit, illuminating how personal history can become a pathway towards empowerment and a proud, self-realized understanding of who we can become. So the structure of today's panel is as follows. I'll introduce each panelist. Each panelist will then take 10 minutes or so in presenting work, whether it's past or current work that they are working on that is tied to the theme kinship. We'll move on then to the moderation aspect, and towards the last 10 to 15 minutes, we will open the floor to our audience who are joining us online today. And for our online audience, in the meantime, if you have any questions that does come to your mind during the presentation, please feel free to drop your question on our YouTube channel, and we will get to answering those questions towards the Q&A with you all. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Aylan. Aylan is a Nishnabewek interdisciplinary artist, curator, and writer hailing from the Pacific First Nation. She's a NSCAD University alumna and received her MFA in interdisciplinary art, media, and design at OCAD University, where she focused her thesis on reconciliation and its relationship to monument and public art. She's completing her PhD at Queen's University in the Cultural Studies program and is an associate professor of Indigenous digital art, culture, and media at the University of Toronto. So, Aylan, I'm going to hand the floor to you. Well, the virtual floor.
All right, thanks. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen there. As long as everybody can see it. Hopefully you're not seeing everything. But anyways, thank you very much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this panel and hearing about everybody else's research-based practices, or however you connect with the themes within the panel. I don't usually use the word kinship in my writing or in my conversations, just because it's not really a word that comes from my community. I don't recall anybody really ever using it. So when I think about that word, though, and how it would apply, I think about like family connections, and within that, even extended family. I do come from Nipissing First Nation, so we're kind of at the end of the road there, where we're surrounded by cousins and aunts and uncles, and so our community really is our family in terms of like even our neighborhood. Um, so that is the community, along with I'm also a single mom of three boys, and I'm also a single grandmother of four grandchildren, three boys and one girl. So I'm a pretty busy person, but I'm also always thinking about how ways that I can kind of make my grandchildren's futures a little bit better. Whether that be like breaking down sort of some of the decolonizing barriers that we experience within institutions, or elsewhere, fighting back against bad policy through the Ontario federal government, whether that be through arts and culture or environment, which is most recently with Bills 5 and C5, which are a huge concern. So my practice is a research-based practice, certainly, but it also it's important to me that I work from a place of lived experience or a place of personal connection. And so that brings me to where I'm at. And oh, by the way, I'm not an associate professor, I'm assistant professor, but it was probably just a typo, so no worries. I just want to make that clear because I'm lower on the totem pole. Anyways, as I mentioned, as was mentioned, I'm an interdisciplinary artist, writer, and curator for Nipissing First Nation. This is a little kind of artwork piece. Speaking of working with archives, this was just something that I kind of was messing around with on my iPad. I've been using the Miro board as a teaching platform for about a year or so now. And it works really nicely because students are able to interact with the board and play videos and things like that. So I was kind of just messing around, even just playing with some of the design capabilities within Miro at that point. So here we are. So I was raised primarily by my grandfather. I come from my parents' divorce when I was quite young, and that put us into a very kind of disruptive home life. So my grandparents stepped in, and I spent most of my time out with my grandfather in the woods, fishing, building things in the wood shop, watching him, do welding, lots of everyday things. And he also was one who took me to my figure skating lessons and skiing and all of that. So I had a very close relationship with my grandfather, and it was a very hard time when he passed away. And he passed away about 10 months before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission started their work in 2013-ish, maybe a bit earlier, sorry. Anyways, my grandfather also was a residential school survivor. So, what I'm going to just sort of like touch on real quick here, I'm probably going to be talking mostly about two different pieces of work. So, this one here is called Aggressive Assimilation, and it was a 2013 work. I'll talk about it a little bit more in the in the questions component, but I just wanted to direct your attention to it because it is a very important sculpture in terms of how I came to understand not only my work, but also the importance of my own connection to work, but also research behind the work, right? Um, I just kind of gave an overview. I'm not going to talk about all of these artworks, but I do want to talk a little bit about the work that I was doing here. So as was mentioned, I'm doing my PhD over at Queen's University in the Cultural Studies program. I'm not done yet. I wish I was, but so part of my so in 2018 when I finished my Master of Fine Arts, I left Toronto and moved back to the Reserve, specifically so that I could go to attend weekly language classes, so I could start learning the language because my grandfather had started teaching it to me prior to his passing, just little bits. Um, so in that, a lot of my research started looking at connection to place, but through languages. So, like, so many places throughout Ontario, I'm sure Canada too, but throughout Ontario, you still retain Mohawk and or Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe languages within their place names, right? And I started thinking about how many people realize that or don't realize that. Even the name Nipissing comes from our language, it's Nibizing, which meant place of the elms. So I started thinking about history of place and language and how language is tied to the land. And that came from sitting in, nighttime classes in our high school with my cousins and, other family members and members of the community. And actually my cousin, Blair Bocage is actually the teacher of the Anishinaabe language. So it really kind of like holds very personal edge to me. I feel very fortunate to be able to still be able to learn the language because a lot of languages are in in danger of extinction. So this was some of the research that I was doing, not only with like Nipissing First Nation with my community, but also in collaboration with Nipissing First Nation, Nipissing University, and Doki First Nation. So down here, you can see we were doing some land-based research around the lake, different sites of significance, checking out the Manitou Islands right here. And that's I sort of I'm a documenter. I love photography. I love film. So I don't really do that in my art practice so much. Well, until recently, but it was just something that I've been really interested in because I'm just really fascinated with the land. So this came to where we are here. And this project here was pre-research that I started. So what happened was I was supposed to, we were, in the middle of everything. The blockades were happening, all sorts of craziness. And then the pandemic hit and everything started going into lockdown. And I thought, well, if I've got, however many months before I start my PhD, I'm going to start doing some research creation sort of research and filming. So started creating these small little films. I'm going to play it, but I'm not going to have the volume on just while I finish talking here. Hopefully it plays. There we go. So basically, you can see here, I'm thinking about the language and its translation. The reason why you see Korean there is because this was shown in South Korea. They gave me a very large gallery. It had a three-channel installation, so it had the music and so here. I was just thinking about, so it's obviously a very long time lapse of a storm that's going over Nipissing. I took this from my front yard. And so this here is just thinking about what do those words mean, right? Like what would we have seen because our language is so descriptive? What would we have been seeing on the land to come up with those words, right? So that sort of thing is where my research kind of brought me to. Where my community comes in, obviously, is within well, I think I want to talk more about my community part with the other residential school works, but this also really speaks to a lot of my community in terms of even just I guess I'll use the word kinship, but like just the really great bonds that we have when we're in these language classes and we're all learning together and we're talking about our just like remember when Dodo used to do this, or our great grandparents and things like that. So I really feel like this is a more of a community piece than maybe it looks, but it very much was created out of love of not only the language but also out of love for our land and where we are. We're very fortunate to be able to be in such a beautiful place and retain, some of our languages and cultures. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I'm okay now. Thank you, Aylan, for the beautiful presentation. That is such a beautiful video. I've never seen snow like that ever, but it's such a beautiful video to watch. I feel like I can just watch it very hypnotically and be lost in it. But thank you for the presentation. Next is Kai. Kai is an associate professor at the Women and Gender Studies Institute at the University of Toronto, whose research focuses on Indigenous futurity, diaspora, and belonging. She's also a 60s scoop survivor, originally from Sturgeon Lake First Nation in Saskatchewan. Kai, I will hand the virtual floor to you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Island, for your work. It's so beautiful and meaningful and all of the things. Thank you. Um, so I'm going to be thinking today with you about, I'm just going to actually time myself because I know we have 10 minutes. Let me just put that on here. I'm going to be thinking with you today about some of the work that I've been in relationship with for a few years now. And that's a practice of kin making. Um, and I'm calling this a practice of kin making the visit. So I think about how are we attracted to stories? What are our ways of coming to know stories? Sometimes our stories are beautiful, sometimes they're gorgeous, sometimes they're spectacular, sometimes they're rapturous. Um, and I'm thinking lately about our visiting protocols and how do we visit with each other? How do we visit with our more than human relationships? And how do we visit beings that are communicated as cultural beings or as beings that are sacred kin relations to us that might be just beyond our grasp? So I'm thinking about the relationship between ourselves and our more than human kinships that are surfacing at a level of I guess folks who have been dislocated from their home territories, folks who have been dislocated through the 60 scoop, most primarily in my research because I am also a survivor of the 60 scoop. So what kinds of relations are these beings calling us into, and how do we recognize the ways that these materials and kin want to be in relation with us, if they do at all? So I'm interested in listening and witnessing with more than human kinships. Primarily, my work is thinking about rock relationships a lot lately. Um, so I'm thinking about listening and witnessing that isn't about extraction as a form, that is thinking more about a relationship perhaps that can be described as a co-animating animation relationship or as a collaboration, co-activation. From my own positionality as someone who has been on the move as a 60 scoop survivor, and one that believes that all our survivals are deeply intertwined with each other's as humans and as more than human kinships. So I think with rocks about our future co-survivors, survivals, particularly those that have undergone rupture and trafficking, as in two particular rocks, rocks in particular that I think very deeply about, and those are my relationships to the Buffalo Child Rock, Mistassini in Saskatchewan, and the Ironstone, which is a 4.5 billion year old meteorite that's currently under the stewardship, finally, of after it's been trafficked, partly to the ROM and brought back to Alberta. So I have some questions about visiting. And I think about what are the relations of more than human beings teaching us in terms of reciprocity and the act of radical relationality. How do we land into each other? How do we rub against each other in times of rupture and pressure and stress? How do we know which relationships are for us and which ones aren't? What is the first curiosity of a visit? Why visit a petroglyph site or a pictograph site or a sacred mound site? Um, and how do we know when a visit is actually a visit or a consensual visit? And what are our ethical and reciprocal processes of visiting? What happens if we get ourselves in the way of a visit? Or how do we know that when a visiting thing is something that we all want as human and more than human relations? What happens when we are unexpected company to rock relations? When we spill over into a relational system, into a relational ecology of more than other human beings? In terms of water and land, how do we understand water as animating rock, for example? How do we anchor this to ways in which we might think about our co-survivals as independent and as us in our communities also experiencing mass shifting, dislocations, and falls as we have been called into a colonial atmospheric of racial capitalist pressure? What are some of the grammars or languages of rock relations that can help us to understand our own embodiment of pressure and how to move through various atmospherics or states of rupture and colonial pressure on our bodies? I think about what can we learn from the knowledge of time and temporality as animating rock through various moments when the world broke apart or broke open for new worlds to emerge. What are our languages for the pressure holds that are in our bodies? And how can we be in right relationship with a broken earth? I have these questions that are also in relationship to questions that others have been asking for like a really long time. And I think about the ways in which sometimes the it's the artists that work with these material forms and these material relationships, and what we can kind of like learn from artists and grammars or languages of relations with more than human kin that can help us through multiple moments when the worlds are breaking apart. I'm really thinking about how artists respond to rock relationships and the transit of these relationships from different states. So, as we may be aware of, Michael Belmore's work, for example, talks about the different states that rock goes through, from like fluid states to like magma, hot states, and different ways of holding pressure. Um, and I've been really interested in glacial erratics as well, in thinking about what is the response of glacial erratics, those who have been kind of pushed into place, as well as meteorites that have landed into place. And these are oftentimes movements that are non-consensual. So I think about the ways in which meteorites and glacial erratics have been moved into place in relationship to survivors' experiences of mass removal through the 60s scoop, through residential school trafficking of children. So what is the response of the glacial erratic to where they are pushed into material or embodied relation? What are the gestures that a rock needs to activate to begin the work of relating? For are they not late to the temporality and spatiality of the spaces wherein they are pushed into material relation? How would we describe this act of relating, relocation, dislocation? What are the grammars or gestures of these types of deep intimacies? And how might we think about how might this way of thinking animate those who have been dislocated through errant landings from our own home communities into white infrastructures, activated through such forms as British socialities or British households? How can we describe our subjectivities and relational forms in deep intimacies with rock and when we consider rock time? So that's just a brief kind of introduction to the things I've been thinking about lately, but also into how we can kind of think about the grammars of rock and rock languages and gestures in relationship to our continued survivals and also the manifestation of otherwise futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. You know, that actually kind of prompted me to have a little bit more thought about rocks in and out of itself. I've never viewed it that way. And now I'm just like thinking more about, you know, whenever I have a smooth sailing, whether it's a friendship or whatnot in life, I would, I guess, describe it as a smooth rock, right? But if it's not so smooth, it's a little edgy, but that's super interesting work that you are working on, like researching rock relationships to and tying it to connections in different ways. So thank you for presenting.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So next we have Mallory. Mallory is a Cameroonian Belgian artist based in Montreal whose expanded photographic practice explores themes of place, memory, and identity. Informed by the legacies of colonization, she merges photography with weaving, ceramics, and sculpture to reanimate personal archives. Her work reflects a nomadic sensibility, bringing temporal and spatial boundaries across Africa, Europe, and North America. Her debut solo show opened at Foundry Darling during Monumenta Biennial in fall 2025. Mallory, the time is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. And so, yeah, I mean, I will just start the conversation by saying, by introducing a bit my practice. So, my practice unfold photography into kind of an expanded central experience to address the notion of place, home, and memorialization. So I kind of engage with a multifaceted and fluid practice that is conceptually driven most of the time, that explore the elusive connection between real and imagined stories by kind of, also using weaving, ceramic, dyeing, farming, sculptural augmentation. And what I do is that I often kind of restituate and reanimate my own family archive in my work to express also nomadic state of constant in-betweenness as well, through the incorporation of multiple time periods, spatial connection, that are testifying also of my journey across between different continents, Africa, Europe, and North America. And so I would say that kinship is at the core of my practice, guiding how I work with family archive, with ancestral knowledge and memory, plants and material processes. And so I also attempt to sometimes reconnect Cameroonian, African, Belgian, European heritage, treating, images, plant, object, heirloom, memorabilia as an extension of kinship ties, familial ties. And so I see gardening as a system of care. So here, so my current research is interested in the intersection of colonial resource extraction, botanical knowledge, and cultural resistance. So colonial botanic garden and geological mapping functioned for a long time as an instrument of imperial control, reshaping landscape and raising indigenous epistemologies and knowledge. And so in response, African diaspora communities, particularly through Afrofeminist seed practice, like seed carrying, seed saving, practice, and Maroon land autonomy as well. I've preserved kind of agro-botanical knowledge through time. asserted cultural sovereignty. So that's kind of the focus of my practice at the moment. And these histories kind of resonate today, informing sustainable, bioclimatic, architectural approach, grounded in local material and climate responsiveness. So yeah, my research kind of aimed to highlight the enduring impact of colonialism on ecological transformation, cultural resilience, and the pursuit of sustainable future. And so I'm also part of, in Montreal, of the Growing Arc collective. And for those who are not familiar with it, Growing Arc it's kind of a collective, a playground to activate, reciprocate, and cultivate relationship with Earth and all being. And so it's been founded by Nadia Bunyan, was a community organizer here in Montreal. So I'm based in Montreal, Quebec. Fashion designer, but also a researcher and sustainable practices. And so with her, like she's been founding this beautiful collective, especially of QT BIPOC people, and kind of using seedlings and remembering a certain cultural heritage through plants and plant wisdom. And so we have a garden in Sainte-Hélène in Montreal, in Ile de Boucherville, we have a community garden in Côte des Neiges also. And so, yeah, the goal is just to come together and spend afternoon caring and tending to the earth, and to also learn about the plants we're caring for, and sometimes bring seeds from our respective homeland. And so yeah, I'm also very much inspired by the work of Sarah Mapps Douglas. So Sarah Mapps Douglas was an African American educator, artist, and abolitionist who used botany and natural science as tool of empowerment for Black women, especially at a time where one of the only discipline that a woman could study at university was botany. So through teaching and botanical illustration, she kind of encouraged women to study plants, not only for scientific knowledge, but also for spiritual reflection, healing, and intellectual freedom. So connecting this to my research, like Douglas, my work with indigenous and diasporic plant, reclaim botanical knowledge as a form of resistance, care, and cultural memory. Both kind of research kind of use plant as living archive that center a Black and indigenous women's relationship to land and knowledge beyond colonial framework. So this is one of my work titled Deborah's Garden. So Deborah's is after my grandmother on my paternal Cameroonian side. So it's kind of a garden that's been grounded in an ongoing exploration on traditional West and Central African plant wisdom. It's been it came together with the help of a lot of women around me, to one of my good colleague, Andrea McDonald, who's Anishinaabe Ojibwe, who kindly shared plant knowledge from her own garden and donated some plant for this garden to exist at Fonderie Darling now. So for those who are in Montreal, it's closing on Sunday. And so yeah, it's at the center there's of the circular brick installation, there's native plants from Cameroon, Senegal, as well as Canada, that all have medicinal and spiritual healing property, including sweetgrass, sorrel, indigo, kenkeliba, white sage from the prairies, etc. And it's accompanied by also a immersive soundscape in which we can hear vernacular recording and folk chants from my aunt's, that kind of breathe life into the garden, as well as bronze sculpture that were made in Senegal, molded against my bodies. So yeah, the material that, when we talk about kinship, I'm also thinking about soil, the red soil of West Cameroon. That is something that come back constantly in my work, that is kind of linear threads. So it come back as a concept, or also like as a color. My paternal land is high in the mountain in West Cameroon in Batoufam. So the higher we go, the more iron oxide that there is, and it's a very fertile soil. And so it also allowed to build roads, to create house with red mud brick. And also it's a soil that I use as a dye. So I, through the process of levitation, also extract the pigment from the rocks and dye the textile that I use for my textile installation with it. Here, some images of the levitation process to extract the pigment. And to conclude, so this led to the creation of the matriarch unravel thread, which is one of my first work that I created like during 3 years. So it expanded. It was two hoop at first. It became three. Maybe at some point it would be bigger, but again, it's currently shown at the Fonderie Darling in the context of Momenta Biennale here in Montreal. And so basically it's dyed with it's dyed with the red ferralitic soil of West Cameroon, and it's made of more than 300 recycled linen and cotton panels that have kind of been repurposed from my family sewing workshop in Douala, because I'm coming from a line of textile manufacturer men in my family. And so I kind of intertwine and rearrange and reimagine a family archive in this circular installation. And also, following also the passing of my grandmother, Deborah, in 2023, I was appointed as her successor and the new family matriarch, which is kind of a tradition that is common in the Banke culture. When a matriarch deceased, she nominates her granddaughter or so her oldest daughter, or if she doesn't have a daughter, her eldest granddaughter, as the one that will kind of take on the memory work in the family. So that can also push me to take on the also the responsibility and the honor. It's like, it's there's black and white in that, but yeah. So what up? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mallory. And I had the opportunity to also see your work at the Aga Khan Museum, and I think I've told you that too a couple of times. I actually visited with my mother, and we weren't like, the moment she saw your work, she loved it. She's like, there's a lot of images of women, I believe, in the work that you've showcased, the matriarch, and she absolutely loved it. And it's also a way for her, like she missed going back home. Like my grandmother, my only surviving grandmother on her side, on my mother's side, she's like, I need to go back home to see my mom. So it was beautiful work that we both saw and enjoyed.
Thank you, Suzanne.
So next we have Meera. Meera is a visual artist based in Tech Toronto, Toronto, Canada. She holds a BA in anthropology, a BFA in photography from the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, and an MFA from Concordia University, Montreal. She has exhibited widely in group and solo exhibitions through Canada and internationally. She's currently an associate professor in photography and the current chair of photography, printmaking, and publications at OCAD University. Meera, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Susan, for putting this panel together, and thank you to my co-panelists. It's been really interesting and informative and inspiring to hear about your practices. The way I thought this was a really interesting word, kind of like how Aylan said, like, I don't use that word in relation to my practice, and I haven't as well, but I really started thinking about the word and thinking about how I initially defined it and then started to stretch that definition. Of course, at the beginning, I was thinking about it in terms of family, which made perfect sense for my photographic, video-based works that predominantly deal with portraiture. And more recently, I've moved into sculpture as well. So I decided to kind of veer my talk a little bit away from a traditional artist talk that would be sequential and much more through the lens of this word kinship and what it could possibly mean. So I chose to not really think about. Of course, there's a family element that you'll see in my work, but I was also thinking about, similar to all of you actually, talking about how our relationship to land or materiality is actually at the heart of a lot of this definition of kinship. And I was thinking a lot about kinship being more about links and finding connections that maybe defy ideas of like family, Western notions of family. So I'll just start. The way that I thought I was going to start was to show a body of work that I created while I was doing a residency at the Art Gallery of Ontario in 2017. And I did several projects there, but one that I felt resonated with this was that I was able to mine the gallery's archive, all of the works in their archive. And I ended up finding these. I was interested in certain topics around motherhood, around women and strength, and I started finding various various works of art in their collection that had an incredible amount of resonance with my existing body of work. So I wasn't making new work in response to works that I was finding in their collection, but rather I was finding this kinship in existence with these artworks. So I'm going to start there, I guess. How does my screen get shared right now? Okay, right now. Here I go. Okay, here we go. Just let me know if you can see everything here. Does that work for everyone? Okay, perfect. So this would be an example. You'll be able to see all of my work is on the right-hand side. All of the work from the AGO's permanent collection is on the left-hand side. And I started seeing the relationship. So if you're kind of looking at my body of work, this was done, oh my goodness, I don't even know how many, over 20 years ago. I was young then, and I was working a lot with the idea. I mean, coming from a mixed race background, my father coming from India, my mother from Northern Ireland, um, I was really interested in anthropology and later archaeology, and really dreamed about being an archaeologist for a very long time until I sort of had this bit of an ethical conundrum with digging up somebody's past that was not my own. It wasn't I was doing a lot of archaeological digs in southwestern Manitoba as I grew up in Winnipeg. And I had some difficulty with even discovering mandibles of a bison and thinking about who am I to dig up this history. And when I took a photography course, I realized that it would give me still ethical quandaries, and I think those are wonderful to navigate and to explore. But it became more about storytelling, and I think that that was something that I realized that I was really interested in. The archaeological part of it was storytelling, but it didn't feel like my story to tell. Whereas photography granted me the opportunity to start telling my own stories, or to create my own stories. And so photography and portraiture became this kind of avenue. So again, all of these were existing, and I was finding these resonances between varied mediums as well, where my practice involved sometimes working within certain communities. This particular one was a project I did. It ended up being a video-based project working with seniors in England who were of South Asian descent. And I was interested in how they were navigating their British or their Indian identities within a British context. When I was working there and working within this community, I met so many other really wonderful mature individuals who became part of like my life and part of my project. So I think the camera is an agent of connection and interrogation, but more than anything, connection. Um, this one is a little cheeky with the cow, but and then the carpet. But I did really enjoy, this was also a still that was also a video work, and how it played with the animal and the human as well. And then these ones I started realizing that like at this very early stage, this is again back in 2017, that I was looking at the conversations that could happen between photographs and objects. I mean, of course, within that historic object, but here I was working with female bodybuilders, and was the one thing that I realized as a photographer, I often think about what do I not see that I crave to see? So I had worked extensively with my mom as at that time a 70-year-old woman, and I felt I was missing that in a lot of contemporary photography, the exploration of women and aging. And here I was working with female bodybuilders and thinking about the ways in which they transgressed notions of femininity and strength. And I was really interested in photographing them when they were not performing and they were not cut and they were not in competitive mode or on a stage. But rather in domestic settings. And I just thought, again, these objects, here is this relationship between sculpture and photograph. So that sort of leads to so there's sort of earlier works, which then leads to my most recent body of work, which is entitled "What We Hold," and this is me and my son, but it could be any human and their son or any intergenerational. I think the lack of identity or specified identity is very deliberate. And I was at this time, my mother had had a stroke, and so I was going back and forth from Toronto to Winnipeg. And at that time, she was also really wanting me to take objects home. My son was sometimes coming with me to Winnipeg and going through her house and my childhood house and looking at objects, and there's always stories to tell. So he would bring something to the hospital and my mom would tell a story about it, and et cetera, et cetera. So that sort of began a playfulness between my son and I, working together with objects. This also coincided with COVID and learning from home and trying to navigate being a mom and a stepmom and having three kids at home, working remotely online and also teaching online. So a lot of the objects are ones that come from either I've collected or have come from my family history and archive, and I've tried to animate them in certain ways by placing them together as still lifes, but as conversations, including here like natural elements, along with photographs, along with objects. And I think as I was working on this project, another sort of element of this project was to create these, I guess I would call them sculptures, but they were, my son and I would stack things up until they almost fell over. And I started thinking about the power of that. So we were both photographing them. Something like this orange is about to teeter, like how do we use our body to kind of, I was interested when Kai was talking about stones and pressures and thinking about that as well. Like it's for me, it was the teetering, the precarity, the you know, how that became a conversation about family and relationships in general. Their ability to shift and morph and change, and sometimes without our control, often without our control. So these elements of the human kind of in conversation, but also touching these objects felt very important for that conversation because it's a bit about, again, the title of the work being What We Hold is also thinking about what we let go as well, and the objects being metaphors for, you know, family histories, for what we create with our children, etc. So I think what started happening is like this particular, when we photographed this and we had been playing with this, again, almost falling every time, like I'd have to keep putting it up and then it would fall over. That piece of paper would always fall over. And then I started craving that, you know, when I saw this photograph, I really wanted a sculpture. I thought I would like this to exist in the gallery alongside the photographs, which led to me applying for grants and getting funded to explore sculptural investigations and learning a new medium and feeling like the joy that I could see my son feeling when he was interacting with these objects and with the camera and the newness of being a child exploring. And I wanted that. I craved that in my own art practice. So becoming a bit of a novice and being very humbled by my lack of knowledge with materials like glass and bronze, went on a journey creating sculptures that would then be in conversation with my photographs. This particular one is very much, this was definitely a collaboration between my son and I. So he created that gold object. It's bronze, but goldy look colored. That's his shape. And the glass one is mine. And it's a conversation really about what it is to be a parent and what it is to be a child. And you know, sometimes I look at that piece, my sort of amber looking piece is, oh, it's giving umbrage to the little, and and then I also see the little holding up. Maybe I'm also putting pressure on that little piece. So if you did magnify this, you would see my son's fingerprints that were cast in bronze in there. So I really love those traces as well. I won't go into each of them, but I can safely say that all of the sculptures are more portraits than I could ever have created with a photograph. I see this one very much as a self-portrait. And again, there's sort of a lot of the inspiration is like my life or dreams or materials that are in my possession that I've reconfigured or cast and put them into various configurations. And this is all culminated into a body work. So again, this is like showing you how there's a conversation between and a kinship I see between both the objects and the humans that held them, but also in the reshaping and transforming of them, that they then become their own stories that then have this kinship with varied mediums like the sculptures and the photographs. And I hope as I keep working that I can keep expanding upon that conversation. And that's sort of the last image. So if anyone is in Saskatoon in February, the show will be heading there to the Kenderdine Art Gallery there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Meera. As you were talking through the last aspect of the objects and how they have their own stories, whether it's stories that you've created and imprinted with your son's fingerprints, for instance, what comes to my mind is some of the surviving objects that my grandmother still has because we had a civil war that happened back in the 90s. And she speaks to how this was one of the very few objects that she managed to keep and speaks to what it meant to her. But thank you as well for sharing your presentation. I do appreciate it, and I really loved listening to it. Awesome. So we are going to go into the discussion component with all of our panelists. So yeah, welcome. So the first question, as I'm looking through the list of questions that I have here, is whether it's the concept of kinship or family connections or land connections, how does that concept shape or inspire the subject matter that you are engaging with, whether as an artist or as a researcher?
I can go first if you'd like.
Sure.
So uh, I started thinking about kin a lot, obviously because I grew up without my kin. So what I used to do is when I was a child and when I became a single mother and different things, I would look up to the stars and I would imagine that those were my kin, that those were my ancestors, that these constellations created sort of like a kinship for me that I was missing when I was growing up in a non-Indigenous family, like in a non-Indigenous community. Pretty far away from my home territory, which is in Saskatchewan. And I began thinking about these constellations as what I call kinstellations. So they became my more than human, other than human kin um, that I felt like there was sort of like a map written in the sky because when you're not given your family archive, you have to create your own kin archive. So constellations became that sort of like co-mapping collaborator in thinking about mapping futures, mapping family, mapping my gestures as a single mother, um, mapping care in some way. So for me, kinship became the subject matter that I've been engaged with because of my relationship to the stars. So that's how I came into relation
Mhm.
with kin.
Thank you, Kai.
Well, I can go next. I think this is a very broad question for me because I feel like a lot of my work just does like naturally come back to my family and to our kind of like family histories, but also our community histories. So working like if I'm thinking about where I'm at with within my PhD or even my research that I'm working on over at U of T, and upcoming projects that I'm working on, I think that uh, talking about those histories and also rewriting them from our perspective, I think is really important. And for me, I hope that what I'm able to leave behind with this, whether if it be through publication or artworks created or whatever, is a better understanding of our community. So, whether that's even just like my kids or my grandkids or my cousin's kids or the current chief or whoever, because I feel like it's important because so much has been lost over like through mass colonialism and just repeated settler colonialism that is still ongoing to this day, right? So we're still very much like we're targeted on a regular basis, especially here in Ontario by Premier Doug Ford is repeatedly targeting First Nation communities here. So it's important for us to be speaking about these histories in order that we can, you know, talk about the present and let's not do this again as we look ahead to the future, right? Under a more, you know, I'm quite concerned right now in terms like for every First Nation community in Ontario and Canada, as we see what's happening in the United States, not just because of Donald Trump. It's not that. It's what's happening within big tech and the mass consumption of minerals that are going to be needed in order to continue to run technologies like AI. Um, as just one example, our social media and cloud use is really causing a lot of environmental damage too, right? So, so I have big concerns about what our governments are looking at in terms of what they have planned for the lands that we live on and have been taken care of since time immemorial. So wherein I place my work is trying to talk about, find places to talk about those things because they're really important to me. Because I do have a very long connection to the land. I grew up like I was a tomboy. I had my own boat. I was like, I would go out fishing when I was just by myself, So, it's really important that my children, my grandchildren get to experience those things. And I just don't see a future right now where, that's going to happen. And I can think about even, compared to changes that my grandfather was talking about when I was younger, right? And how much change I've seen, right? So I really feel like I center kind of everything that I do in terms of research and future work, whether that be writing or artwork, that to ensure that it is geared towards talking about those histories for not only our family but for all of my community's families, and I don't speak on behalf of them, obviously. I'm only one perspective out of a community of like thousands, but it's still important to like take what I've known, like what I've learned, whether that be through language classes, just community, just chatting with elders, chatting with with other community members, knowledge keepers, family, and my own lived experience and history on the land, and what I deem is really important. I think that's where I sort of center myself.
Thank you.
I just loved your answer. It really resonated with me thinking about the stars and that idea of like finding links. I think that the idea of like, I think belonging is kind of at the core of this, whatever definition you have of kinship, but um, that through art, for me, I feel like it's, whether it's with a camera or whether it's through video or whether it's through sculpture, there's this sense of making links. And whether it's with people or whether it's with objects, that hold meaning, or that through the act of photographing them, they develop meaning. Um, I think there's something wonderful, like the way that you're looking up at the stars is sort of the way that I feel like I'm able to look at the possibilities of art. Like I can find a way that I feel like I belong within that, or that if I don't belong, I can still explore it. The lack of belonging. And for me, objects are becoming more and more exciting as and materials as ways of speaking about belonging or not belonging, having kinship or longing for it. I think that that's really wonderful. And when it comes to being a parent, also, I think it's super important to start thinking about as well. You start shifting your perspective of belonging and how are your kids defining that? And I think that kind of intergenerational question, like for me, I never felt like I had two immigrant parents from very different backgrounds growing up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and never knowing like who is my community, where do I belong? And now I actually feel that I totally know where I belong in a similar, it's not with stars necessarily, but I love that idea. I think that if I'll take that and hold that with me. But I think these strategies are wonderful. I think art provides us that. For me, it provides us that opportunity. And through other artists, like just hearing that, hearing that response was really wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you, Meera.
Um, yeah, I mean, I can go shortly on that. But yeah, I think kinship for me is more like a epistemological, like knowledge ground for which my practice emerge. It kind of offer a framework for understanding also how memory, care, and continuity kind of move through my body, the landscape that live within me, diasporic histories. And I don't receive kinship as necessarily a fixed lineage, but I approach it more as a dynamic relational system that can change and is fluid, because sense and belonging can change and so I kind of like structure my inquiries into how personal and collective identity are negotiated across time and place. So yeah. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think at first, like kinship in my practice, like at the beginning of my practice for 5 years ago, it started with my own familial stories. And then it kind of expanded to broader communities, broader and and finding kinship to gardening, finding belonging to belonging for me, it's not necessarily determined by geographical boundaries. It's not necessarily physical, but it's mostly true relational, like I was saying, relational, dynamic with being, space, and people. Yeah.
Mhm. I also echo everybody's statements about like your responses to the question. For me, kinship in a way, I define it very differently. I wasn't born nor was I raised here in Canada. And I do consider myself as a global citizen because I was born and raised in a country where you did not receive citizenship upon birth. And should anything happen to your parents' employment, you would be told to go back home and you would have 30 days to leave, right? So, like growing up here in Canada and then having a home back to Somaliland after the conflict has settled down and people are going back to their, I wouldn't say normal way of living, but I would say it was disrupted and now they are surviving and doing the things that they could to continue surviving in different ways, right? So for me personally, connections form where I'm at. It's not necessarily just always tied to family. Um, and it does resonate with me when, like Ellen, for instance, you spoke about land connections, as well as you, Kai, you spoke about the rocks as well as the stars, Meera with objects, and you, Mallory, with the land, and then using the sources that you have received from the land and creating works with it from scratch. So it's been really great to hear all of your responses to the question. Um, this is a question that I did not provide to you all because it is something that I found it like connecting through all of your works in different ways, and that is your connections to the land in and out of itself. So I'm just wondering, I guess, when you are in that, I guess, phase, this is a very half-thought question, it's not fully formed question. So across all of your works, there were parts of the land or the earth that has been incorporated, whether as a research material or used to create an actual creative work. So I'm just wondering, when you are in that exploration period, what sort of relationship do you form to that, to the land or to the material that you have received from the land?
I'm okay answering this first because I feel like mine is less directly related as the three of you are really about, you know, the actual earth. But one thing I will say is that the thing that motivated me when I was in anthropology was the idea of unearthing. Um, and that some of the objects, like it's kind of come, I really love aging so much because I like being able to look back a little bit and contextualize things. This is like the gift of that. But when some of the sculptures that I found and some of the materials that I used, for example, the one that the sculpture they said was a self-portrait. It was this very bizarre rock that came from a lot of pressure, Kai. But my stepfather is an architect in Winnipeg, and when he was um, moving a home from one place to another, found this extraordinary rock formation and gave it to my son. And when I started working with the materials, we were also renovating our home and digging a foundation, which I think is, I always think about things symbolically. So the idea of like the newness of a home and blending a family. And there we are digging in the ground. And I found, so the first thing was my son was digging in the ground and found a trove of coral and bones and shells. So thank you to whoever was in my home before and left these treasures for him. And secondly, we found a trove of, when we started going deeper, of bottles, glass bottles, like medicinal bottles. They had very unique things about like Toronto pharmacies with these histories. One of them was really interesting because it was a bottle that said Belfast on it, which is where my mother was born. And I was like, what is that doing here? So that idea of like thinking about the land as holding so many stories, whether it's holding the objects that are buried beneath the layers, or whether it's like the idea of the land holding those stories, the idea of us as artists holding stories, the idea of, you know, knowledge keepers holding stories. I think it's quite a profound reality. Yeah. So that's all I'll say about that.
I guess I'll go, Kai. Is that cool? Um, yeah, so I mean, I guess that one's kind of like it's weird, I guess, for me because I grew up having like being outside all the time, like doing things on on with my hands, like I like I said, I was a tomboy. I was like digging holes, and I was that one who was like gonna throw an old playing card into the spokes of my bike so I could like make a motorcycle sound as I like ran down, zip down to see if the next train that passed, right? So I have like a long history of that, and so now as an adult, and I think that even if I think back to like the work that I showed from 2020, where it was really about like contemplation, like quiet contemplation for me. um that's those three videos are only like a small section of like many videos that I have, that I still want to work with and edit and stuff like that. Um, uh, so, uh, so I do have like a lot of time where it's just spent in observation, I guess, in meditation. And even now when because I literally hate living in Toronto because and I struggle with it because of the fact that I'm not able to just go outside and like see the lake, or I really struggle with even just seeing wildlife here in Toronto on my front, like what little patch of grass is on my front lawn. When I see like a rabbit out there, just trying to find food. So I really do struggle being away from it, from my community, and also from my home place. I had the same problem when I moved out to Halifax to do my Bachelor of Fine Arts too. I found that urban living is just not, I don't fit in. I mean, I do just to get by, but it's just not, I don't feel as at peace, I guess, is the best way to explain it. So when I do go home, long time, the first thing I do is I'm out at the waterfront and I'm just like, just watching sunsets, watching sunrises, um, thinking about, I think about ancestral stories a lot. I think about what our ancestors used to see. That was, when I go down and I to the lake shore and I look out and I think about like how many millennia have my ancestors been standing on the shore looking out at the same group of islands or the same waterways, the same cove. How did they use the land, all that stuff. So I guess that's just where I'm at.
Thank you, Aylan. Sorry, Kai, were you going to say something?
Sorry, I was just asking Mallory if they would like me to go next. I'm happy to.
Oh yeah, feel free, Kate, to go next.
Okay. Um, so I exploration mode. Okay. So okay, first of all, I'm thinking a lot about um creation stories and stories about the Buffalo Child Rock, in particular, Miss Dasseny, who did a series of spirals. And it's an adoption story, actually, where the Buffalo child was adopted by the Buffalo Nation and then actually rolled 4 times and came into a state of rock. So, so with this kind of way of thinking, my process is to actually take, I don't know if you can see this, but this is sort of like just an embroider. This is what I do in my free time is I kind of like create just like I sew and I stitch and I'm also a star blanket quilt maker. So I've been thinking about the landing glyph for a long time. So when I think about landings and like movement between states, I think about landing glyphs. So the star blanket, the star quilt, to me is actually a meteoric sort of landing glyph and to catch the falls. So when meteorites fall, they create this sort of impact crater. And for me, as I'm stitching the star blanket, the star quilt, I'm thinking about that as a falling glyph, like a landing glyph to hold the fall. And it makes sense to me that within our practices, when I first went home to Sturgeon Lake, which is originally where I'm from, my birth mother gifted me with a star blanket because they do to me represent these like landing glyphs. And so um, and so my process is that I constantly am gathering these bits of rock, these bits of stone, in the way of reading N.K. Jemison's The Fifth Season, to think about the Broken Earth trilogy, to think about beings that are calcifications of rock. So the N.K. Jemison has this character named Hoa, who's this stone eater, and the origins have ways of kind of sessing underneath and moving tectonic shifting patterns, like feeling the rock underneath the substrata of the earth. And so I think about buffalo child rock and the spiraling and the calcification of the body and what kinds of ways the body can actually mirrors rock and has rock within our bodies. Um, so I've been thinking a lot about calcification and and what that feels like for that buffalo child, for that buffalo to kind of roll very slowly 4 times and in these transitional spaces in between. What 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 is that way of thinking, or what is that way of being that kind of pushes them forward into another role? And buffalo are huge, and they have these like weird kind of like huge kind of lumps on their bodies that it would be very hard to roll as a buffalo. But they do this. They create these little biomes, these little ecosystems when they wallow. So in their wallowing, they actually create these little vesicles in the land that are like worlds. So as they're breaking up worlds, they're also reworlding and creating these little pockets for life and livingness and survival. Um, so I guess my response would be that my process is just constantly thinking about rock relations and what they teach us, and going back to some of those stories, like the Buffalo Child Rock shared by the late Barry Hennekew, and thinking with these people about, I guess, how these stories land, um, when we think about kin and chosen kin, and how we, I guess, relate to each other and the rocks within us, and our own processes of holding pressure and calcifying and being fluid and being fluctual. Mhm.
Thank you, Kai.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about, yeah, this material is more, I've been using a lot of soil, rocks into my practice for a long time, especially through dyeing, and like I was saying earlier, through levitation process. So it's important for me to kind of anchor as much as I anchor myself in certain place, to anchor also the material of these plays in my practice. And I do so through mostly dyeing and also collecting rock soil from different places, including Cameroon, including Senegal, and then finding ways to incorporate them in bodies of work that I create.
Awesome. Thank you all for your responses. The next question is, when you come across a photographic, like archival I can't talk anymore. When you come across an object or a document or an archival photograph, can you describe what that moment like of it became alive to you, when you were engaging in that creative or slash research process?
I'll go first since I have an answer. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, I thought about a lot about this one here. So because a lot of my research is looking back at histories. My grandfather actually, in his later years, became a prolific journaler, and so he would, have these little notebooks, and he would have them in his bedside, and I guess he would write in them. So he actually started multiple of them, and some of them they wind up a little bit of the same story, written a bit differently. But I think maybe he had forgotten that he had already written it down, or perhaps misplaced the other notebook. Anyways, um, years ago, a few years ago, I went through all of the notes that he had written, and I had got them all. I put them all into a document for myself. And one of the things I think that really hit me, not aside from obviously, it's really interesting to hear about his life as a guy, guiding in Algonquin Park and in Temagami, but also, some of his stories from residential school are certainly documented in there too. Although like my father and I have a lot of like ones that he told us, so there's a lot that's not written down that's up here, right? Um, so just in thinking about that, I think there were things in that piece of writing that really sort of gave me a little bit more direction in terms of like how I wanted to like write out my dissertation, in terms of mapping out key points that I wanted to speak to, because I want to jump off of where he was, right? So whether that be site or just topic. But one of the things I think that really stood out for me was, and at the time I was doing a lot of research with Nipissing University and a few other universities around Canada, on the eel, the American eel, Pimisi, that used to be was a food source in our lake, but is no longer gone because they've lost their ability to get back to our lake, because they come all the way from the Sargasso Sea down in Bermuda. I don't know if many people know that, but they come all the way through Nova Scotia and all the way up to the St. Lawrence Canal. And in fact, an elder, William Commanda, talks about how there used to be so many eel in the St. Lawrence River that you could see what do they call it? Great rivers of silver or something like that. Anyways, but now of course it's an endangered species. It's on the red list. So But, thinking about how that eel would sustain many communities, starting from Nipissing all the way in Northern Ontario, going all the way out to Mi'kma'ki, right? And Halifax and communities along the way, right? Mohawk communities, all sorts of other communities. So I think one of the things that my grandfather notes in that really struck me is that he talks about because we had a huge decimation of sturgeon on our lake, and that was because we had caviar factories, and in fact, my chief Scott McLeod, our previous chief Scott McLeod, often talks about how the the sturgeon was being there were so many sturgeon being pulled out of these large pound nets that they were actually burning the carcasses for fuel at the mills. So just this mass waste of this settler colonial come in and just decimate. We'll never have the sturgeon population again. They don't anticipate it ever coming back in our lake, right? So that's a big concern. My grandfather in his notes talks about how and I think this is getting back to that. What really struck me is he talked about how when he was younger, they used to see sturgeon jumping out of the lake on a regular basis, like porpoises. Like that was how much sturgeon was still in our lake, right? You don't see that anymore. You might see it every once in a while. It's probably a very rare occasion, but just in thinking about that recognition of what is no longer there, right? And even that, just as a final point, goes back to our word for our place, Nipissing, place of the elms, right? There are a couple of different, but place of the elms, right? My grandfather used to talk about the word for our place because of the loss of so many elms through the resource extraction that happened through our Indian agent, in our community, and also in Doki First Nation, because we're sister communities. And also because of Dutch elm disease. So we can be thinking about those old place names as being historical markers for what was, right, as much as what is now.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question, Susan? It was about historic photos.
Yeah, so can you describe a moment when an archival photograph, object, or document came alive for you in the creative/research process?
I can say that I think so much about when I was looking at, I mean, I'm re-photographing historic photographs and then kind of covering them up so that identities aren't totally revealed. But I like the idea of somebody looking at the photograph of the photograph and thinking about their own photographic archive. I think about it as a bit of a lament when I see them. I like they're absolute treasures, but I lament that these objects don't exist anymore as in the same capacity. The idea of what it was to put together a family album, the care that went into kind of curating that and organizing it, and now how digital archives are the norm. And that there is something magical about them. There's times where I have photographed the photographs only from the back, where I can see the stamp that says usually a date. And I think sometimes there's again, the capacity for maybe people of a certain generation to know that they have these objects or their parents' photographs or their grandparents' photographs, and they're able to imagine what is on the other side of it, seeing the back of it. I think those little, when the edges of photographs used to have, there were special kind of scissors or things, and there was something so considered about the way that they would enter, it goes from lived experience through camera processes to the print to your hands and how they get passed along. So for me, I was thinking a lot about, of course, the contents of them inspired me on a personal level, but the holding of them, the tactility of what it was to, especially if family members are gone or, you know, a photograph I have of my parents who divorced when I was a teenager, but um, on their wedding day, to imagine this life before me and that no longer is part of my reality. But I think there's something about somebody who I'm not going to remember who it was, but said that photography was a beautiful lie. And I love that because it's like whoever's holding this document has this different resonance and a different interpretation of the story that it holds. And I think there's absolute magic in that. And I think for me, that was a big inspiration, is thinking about the power that is being held when one is engaging with a historic image, particularly family image. But yeah.
Mhm. Thank you, Meera.
Yes, I'll go next, if that's okay. So as soon as you mentioned photograph, I was thinking about this research that I'm doing right now for a manuscript, and it's a photograph of the Buffalo Child Rock Mistassini being blown up. And it was TNT'd by the Saskatchewan government in 1966. And there were multiple sticks of dynamite inserted into this buffalo child kin, and pieces were exploded and trafficked to different places. Part of the buffalo child rock landed in Lake Diefenbaker and is at the bottom of a lake. And is interesting to me because as I was considering putting this photograph in my book, I realized the kind of harm that actually exposing this photo again in the book would contribute to my like communities. So it was a big decision that I had to make, like, do I include this photo? Do I not? And actually it wasn't that big. I mean, I think the photo lives on in my mind, um, and will always live on in my mind. So then it actually got me thinking about, I'm not going to reproduce this photo, because we've all been exploded in some ways, and it's certainly not something that I want to include. But I was also thinking about how it was that they found that they saw the remnants of the buffalo child, the bones, if you will, the fleshy materials of the buffalo child at the bottom of the lake through sonar. So they used this technology that was developed as a violent technology to actually capture or to sonar, to feel through the resonance of this rock at the bottom of the water. And so that became kind of an interesting thing for me to kind of think about, is that there were divers that went down and they used this sort of hydroacoustic technological form, emanating sound and receiving pulses and or sending out pulses and listening for echoes in order to kind of to be in relation with this kind of akin. And I also started learning Cree a few years ago. My cousin Belinda teaches Neheowen, so I started taking classes. And one of the words that I learned, well, that I obviously didn't learn because I'm too afraid to actually say it right now because I don't know if I'll get it right. But the Cree word actually translates into the boy who walked underwater. And so I started kind of thinking about the speculative kind of relationality and kin of this sacred ancestor, sacred kinship of mine that, or of ours, that that has this sort of like subaqueous kind of life and the kinds of fishy relations and different kinds of more than human connections that this being has. So I think that that photo was something that is really a part of me and is a part of my memory, is a part of my personal archive, um, and has been an incredible gift, but also an incredible space of like rupture.
Mhm. That is beautiful to listen to hear. I guess I can just tag on a little bit. Um, it hasn't happened to me just yet, but I am waiting for the day that it does happen when an object comes alive to me in some research or a creative process. But I could speak to a process that did just happen with my dad, for instance. He had this old, very old manuscript that was he found through someone, and he was able to get a photocopied version of it like when he was in his 20s, and now he's in his 70s, and he's like, now I have the time to really sit down, read through that manuscript. And it was like a 3-year journey for him in translating old Arabic language into English. And he's like, it's not for me, it's for those who come after me, and it's for you guys to learn parts of your history that may have been lost, or that has been lost, or is in a care with someone that has nothing to do with us per se. So for him, that was his moment of an object that came alive, and then he engaged in that process, and he's like, this is it for me. So I just wanted to share that part as well. But Mallory, if you wanted to also speak to the question, you're more than welcome to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I often my work stem from photographs, from photographic family archive. I have it's interesting because on both sides of my family, I have both Cameroonian and Belgium. I have kind of access to a lot of photograph, which as I know it's really not always the case in some families. So because also the foundation of my practice has for a long time been analog photography. Often when I started research, I go back into my family archive and to take on inspiration. And I have this photograph from the 60s of my grandfather in Cameroon dressing with two of his other cousins dressing in traditional dub cloth attire, which is like a indigo dye, cotton weave cloth that is like centuries old and that is usually worn during traditional ritual, funeral, dance ceremonies. And it's not everybody that can wear it. You kind of have to either be close to the chief of your village or descendants or notable or um, so yeah, so this photograph of my grandfather wearing the Ndop Club before dance ceremonies is one that I also inherited from my family. So I'm also keeper of it and many other photograph in my family. And so that has kind of also inspired my research into indigo dye and cash crop during the 18, 19, 20th century. Um, and yeah, led me to Senegal, Cameroon, Italy after that for a research project around indigo and cotton.
Thank you, Mallory. Um, the topic of consent did come up here and there. So my question to you all, how do you manage consent when you're presenting archives, whether it's images of family or research or videos or whatever that looks like to you? So how do you manage receiving consent, or do you ask for consent, or is it like after the work has been presented, then you ask for consent? I guess my question, that's the question to me. That's the question to all of you.
I'm happy to start this as working with photography and working with portraiture. I always, if I'm not working with family members, I mean, I think I'm always getting consent. Um, I with when I'm working with strangers, because I've done a lot of work with strangers, like I've just met them and I decide to photograph them. I used to, I don't do that as much anymore, but I used to always get an actual form and get written consent. But if somebody ever changed their mind, and even though I had legal consent and I was authorized to use this work, if somebody ever didn't want their image circulated anymore, I would absolutely hear that and would remove it from my portfolio. I think that's the exchange that you give. You understand. I mean, when at some point somebody had told me you should always put yourself in front of the camera, even if it never gets shown, but so that you're reminded of the power dynamic of what it is to be behind a lens, and how I tell my students all the time that when you're holding a camera, even if it's your iPhone, like the camera on your iPhone, there's that lens, and it holds a legacy that is deeply rooted in colonialist endeavors and pseudosciences, and power has always been directly related to cameras and representation. And I think that's a real reason why working with my kids, I am constantly obscuring their identity, because even if though they're so keen on being part of my practice, that they also, maybe I'd say our practice instead of mine, but that they aren't old enough, they don't understand the ramifications yet to know how that will resonate for them. So I think for me, a strategy has been to obscure identity. But I would just say that it's a constant thing I think about, but I would never. I used to do street photography when I first picked up a camera, and I love street photography as like a viewer. Um, Not all of it, but yes. But I think that now I could never do it because of that lack of consent. And I think the world has shifted so much since I picked up a camera in the 90s, um, to people being very conscious of being surveyed and what it is to, I mean, I think our anonymity is cherished and prized, and we live in a world where I think it's harder and harder to be anonymous if you choose to, because there's just too many lenses. We're in a world that has never seen more photographs in its history. So I think consent is pivotal and powerful and needs to be respected and upheld.
True. I agree.
Well, I guess I can go next, just to keep things going here. This is actually a really great question. And it's actually exactly why I'm stuck in my PhD right now, because I do have like some pretty big concerns in terms of some of the family histories, knowledges, and sites that I was supposed to share in my PhD dissertation. A few years ago, I sat on a Queen's. They're kind of like revamping or getting input into the dissertation process as they like shifted up. But we talked about protections for Indigenous dissertations in terms of protection of knowledge and being able to put our dissertations into like some like a lockdown mode so that it wouldn't be able to be accessed publicly, right? So within that, I found out that no, Queens is only going to do that for 5 years, which leads me to some really, concerning problems, because and especially I think I really was heightened awareness after the petroglyphs at Bon Echo Provincial Park got obliterated a few years ago. So because some we have those up on our lake too, and so we receive so much hatred from the local settler community on a regular basis, um, that it concerns me, even when community members in my community are posting photos of the petroglyphs on Facebook. So so because I recognize that those sites, and we're not talking about just petroglyphs, we can talk about like burial sites or other sites of significance where there's leftover, like chimneys and stuff like that left over from community sites where we would like hunting for the summertime and stuff like that. So But it occurred to me that, those sites could become sites of like revenge, right, from the local settler community, because they do that. They've been doing that for a long, long time. Um, and so within that, I've felt a real like big responsibility in terms of protecting those places. So that leaves me in a place where a good component of my land-based research almost has to be left out of my dissertation because we won't protect it, right? So yeah, so it is a hard thing to kind of navigate. Now, with that being said, I just also want to mention that Nipissing First Nation has a research like committee where you submit your research project to them. All universities have to go through it. Even I have to go through it as a PhD student. So they look at it, they identify any issues they may have or whatever. And of course, there's like a constant feedback sort of loop on that too, right? So um, within that scope, anything that I do put in that dissertation once it gets done, obviously I wouldn't even put it through the university unless it had like eyes from within the community, elders, knowledge keepers, even just like community members who are just knowledgeable in different areas of the reserve, or whoever wants to read it. Um, so that is something that obviously I wouldn't my research, my outputs are not qualified unless I get community approval on that. So I obviously am not just here to like go, oh, and here and here and here. There is a lot of thought that goes through it, but yeah, it is concern. And it's I've been talking for a long time about institutions who talk big colonial praxis, but then in reality, um, you know, they're missing big pictures in so many aspects, and it turns into a really exhausting system, especially when you're single momming it and you're trying to do a PhD and you're dealing with like these sort of like real uh, difficult situations and policies and things like that. So, anyways.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can pick up on that too, because I've had experiences with that as well, and thinking about consent and the institutions in which we're in some cases, is specifically for like grant funded research that we're doing, is that oftentimes these kinds of relational practices require a lot more time than what the funding cycles are. So it actually, a lot of it comes out of your own pocket, the community engagement work, because it's not going to get funded elsewhere. So you're spending a lot of your own funds to visit with community, to develop relationships, to bring food, to always feed people, to like there are certain things that just fall outside of the institutional sort of like view. Like they don't there's all this underground stuff that happens when you are like working in relation or developing radically relational practices in your work. And it's not necessarily radical neither, it's just the way it is. So, I do find that pretty difficult to navigate. I also think that, having grown up when I did, in the family that I did, and in the context that I did, consensuality was never really, there wasn't a language, there wasn't even a practice that the conversations of consent came in my life a little bit late, really. So, so now we're in a moment where we're thinking about consensuality, and we're parents. We're also talking about this with our children, and we have to develop like a new practice, a new language, a new grammars, a new gestures to be able to, I guess, think about consent, and to activate consent. What does consent mean with more than human, which is sort of what I started off with, is how do we know when we have the consent of the land to be here, to how do we know when we have the consent of the pictograph, or, the petroglyph, the terraformation, to actually even visit on the land. So, so I think that these are huge questions. And I think that they require the space, time, and care that they need to take, because there's lots of land intimacies. There's lots of like intimacies between more than human kinships on land that we will never know. And it's okay that we don't know. We cannot know all of the things. For example, the ways in which the mounds are speaking to each other, the ways in which the pictographs and petroglyphs are speaking to each other. Like these are languages and grammars of radical relationship building that, we will never know. But I always say to err on the side of caution, to tread gently, um, to know how to invite and to know how to receive an invitation, to know how to visit with humility, and also to constantly ask these questions, how do I know when I have the consent to even speak in these ways in this space? There's just so much consideration that needs to be to be had when we're thinking about consent with each other in our more than human relations.
Mhm. Thank you, Kai. Um,
Yeah, I think for me, I will add on like, yeah, what Kai said. I think it makes sense for me. And I also believe that, fiction can also be like fictive stories, and imagined realities can also be a way to work from archives sometimes that are like either like, tackling like a sensible past or delicate stories, So sometimes it's not about always showing the face of the people in the archive, but you can also rework the material and reimagine it, replace it in the present. So for me, using like screen printing, textile, weaving, beadings, image transfer, dyeing, it's also ways to work with material that is a bit more opaque. And yeah, and also it's important for sure to have the consent also of who along this picture and well, I'm talking about photograph because that's what I'm working with now, most of the time. And because I've been working, but now I'm working more with collective political photograph. But in the past year, I've been working with familial photograph, and so um, it's been an interesting process because oftentimes these photographs were also inherited. So I had the consent of family, by the fact that it was inherited to me. But yeah, it's still, you have to think about how you want to protect the stories and not instrumentalize and objectify also the people that are found in the archive, and how you want to honor them, and yeah, and build on how archive can also be continue to be built on in the present.
mhm. Thank you all. We'll move to the Q&A with the audience online. So far, we have one question, and I am mindful of the time too, so we have 8 minutes to go. So we have a question from Mesky 2760. They ask, just wondering, how do you navigate disrupting or discouraging erasure or colonization in a constant manifestation, and hopefully post short-term individualistic frame into sustainability and lineage? I can also post a question on the chat. Would that help? Yeah,
Yeah, maybe if
awesome. So let me just copy paste it.
think about it.
Yeah. And if it helps, if you feel like you're able to answer the question after the panel, I can send the responses or copy paste the responses and respond to their question.
I'm so sorry. Think I think there was a question about like erasure, like how do we navigate erasure?
Mhm.
Um, and I didn't quite catch the rest of the question. I'm so sorry.
No, no, it's okay.
I
So,
don't see it. I don't see it in the chat either.
No,
oh,
it's
you
not in the chat.
don't. Okay. Sorry. I sent it to.
It's okay.
I'll send it to you all individually because I think I can do that.
Oh, we see it, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Or there's a direct, no, I see it. Thank you.
No problem. Does everybody see what Aylan has sent, or should I still? No, I'm just on the roll, so I'll just send it to everybody individually.
I'm a bit confused by the question. That's the hard part for me right now is I think I need to wrap my head around if there was like another, this is probably just my brain too, but if there was another way of wording the question,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
really
I'm feeling the same way. I'm struggling a little bit with the last part because I'm not really sure what that means.
like
I'm sorry, I looked at it like for a
yeah,
while.
Yeah, no worries. I've
Perhaps see if the person's still here, maybe they can like rephrase it for us. So I mean, like I get so I can I can sort of understand like how are we like constantly like navigating like discouraging constant erasure when we're constantly being erased and stuff like that. But I'm not sure about the next part of it. So yeah.
If they're still online, hopefully they're able to clarify the question. If not, then you're more than welcome to MSQ 2760. You're more than welcome to send us an email at onsitegallery@ocatchu.ca, and then I'll circulate that question to the panelists. And if they give me a response, then I'm more than happy to send you the response just as well. But I guess we can close the panel today with I'm super excited to hear what's next for you all. So, can you give us a glimpse of your upcoming projects or talk about it?
Well, I'll go again since I've got that together. Well, actually, so I am currently in the process of working on another public art project. I actually forgot to add the public art pieces to my little presentation, but it's on my website, which is just my aylan.ca. I'm not trying to promote my website. I'm just letting you know where they are. Um, but yes, so right now I'm actually in the middle of working with the city of North Bay on the first Nipissing piece of public art that will be on Nipissing territory, to our knowledge. And so they actually just put it on hold. It's a little bit on hold because they're moving the site. So I'm hoping to get like a lakeshore right along Lake Nipissing, so it'll like embody like star knowledge and sort of histories of land and place, but also cosmologies and a whole whack of things. It's going to be pretty neat. So that's what I'm kind of in the middle of working on besides all of my research and writing.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm working on a SSHRC-funded project with the 60 Scoop Network in Ottawa. So we are going to be doing decolonial body somatic work alongside pictographs. And we're going to be thinking about visiting practices together and art making, research creation. As part of this inquiry around mineral kin that have been trafficked and as survivors that have also been trafficked.
Thank you, Kai.
For me, I'm Right now, I have two exhibitions in Montreal. One in the framework of Momenta Biennale, which is the La Biennale des Arts Contemporains de Montréal. And this year's been curated by Marianne Yemzi, who's a German Cameroonian curator based in France. And also have a duo show at Articule Art Center until the 6th of December in the context of the Black Atlantic Network Symposium organized by Nigra Juventa. It's a nonprofit organization here in Montreal that do amazing, innovative things. Yeah, and otherwise rest. And after that, grant writing. And after that, yeah, travel probably more in Europe next year and show there. Yeah.
Thank you, Mallory, and good luck on the grand writing. I feel
Yeah, thank you so much.
I like the rest part, Mallory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you
Yeah.
heard in my bio that I am the current chair of two programs at
Yeah.
OCAD. A lot of my creative energies have been a bit stifled by doing administrative, and you all know there's probably the shuffle. So that has been a real adjustment. So the current body of work that I was describing has been circulating, luckily, and is part of a touring exhibition. So it is heading, like I said, to Saskatoon, and then I have one piece of that body of work that is going to be next week in a group show at Zaluki Contemporary, who's celebrating their 10th anniversary. And other than that, I will be applying for a sabbatical in the hopefully near future so that I can reignite my creative side that has been feeling a bit dormant and neglected. So I'm really anticipating that. And it's a panel like this is something really important because it's getting my brain thinking again and hearing about all your practices and just reminding me of what it is to be surrounded by makers and thinkers. And so thank you. I just want to thank you so much.
And I also want to echo Meera. Thank you all for joining us today. I truly and honestly, and I hope for those who joined us online had the opportunity to really listen and to really think about different ways of engaging either with the land or with our personal or family or public archives. And I thank you all for being part of this panel today. And in terms of what's coming up next at Onsite Gallery, have to, promote what's going on here. So on December the 3rd, we do have our curatorial tour with Ryan Rice, who is the curator of Rosalie Fable, belonging 1982 to 2024. It'll be hosted in person at Onsite Gallery on Wednesday, December the 3rd from 5 p.m. to 6:30. And then on the Saturday, which also marks the last day of the exhibition, Saturday, December the 6th, we do have two exciting back-to-back events. The first event, it focuses on calligraphy. So we have Nestor, who is a OCAD alum, and he'll be working with us on this calligraphy workshop. And then for the second event, stay tuned for more information that will be posted on our social media, as we will have Rosalie Fable in attendance along with her book in the space. So if you're in the city, pop by. Thank you all for joining us and have a great, fantastic weekend ahead.
Thank
You so
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
See
Bye,
you.
everyone.